Let's face it, we airline pilots are typically A-type individuals. We think that for the most part we're bulletproof and we can just do about anything that gets thrown our way. We can accept any challenge. But sometimes life has a way of crashing down on even the toughest, most resilient among us. Until now, ALPA CRP folks have taken the calls in the middle of the night from a pilot who is looking for answers to life's problems, which have cropped up that need extra special attention. However, ALPA's first Vice President and National Safety Coordinator, Captain Joe DePete, has led the way toward a brand new ALPA Pilot Assistance program to provide the very best support possible to those individuals so that they don't have to face them alone. So Joe, welcome. Please introduce our panelists.
Really, this has been a labor of love for about 3.5 years now, and so I'm really excited about this panel in particular, and you'll soon know why. You all know Dr. Berry, the federal air surgeon. Already introduced him as well. Former also president of the Aerospace Medical Association at one point in time, right? And Quay Snyder. Quay is the CEO and president of AMAS. Also a master CFI. How many of those, Quay? About 24 total, maybe? Yeah, I'm jealous. Okay, and a glider pilot, so despite what Tammy Duckworth said earlier, we do love you. Yeah, I know. We got John Taylor, our new Pilot Assistance chairperson, who I waited to get off when he got off of probation at United. We waited to the day to give him a call to take on this task. And to his left is Ellen Brinks. She took over as Aeromedical chairperson, jumped into the middle of a maelstrom and has done an amazing job. And then finally we have Mark Malin. He is our aeromedical specialist, a staff member, and also a human performance specialist. So thank you all for coming, and Dr. Berry in particular, you never say no to us, so we really do appreciate it, and I don't know what the payday is. You talked about that earlier. But anyway, no, thank you, everybody. I want to take a few moments to kind of set the stage. You heard a little bit of this on Monday for those of you that were here. The former PA chairperson, okay, Jerry McDermott, actually, he's one of our award winners, in fact, at this Air Safety Forum. When I was first took over as National Safety Coordinator, he approached me in January of 2015 and indicated that he perceived a need for pilots that were coming forward with non-work related stresses, and then there was no real pathway for them to accomplish that. So most of all our PA programs tend to be centric of work-related stresses, and the only thing we had available at the time really was CIRP, right, Critical Incidents Response. Now they have debriefing and diffusing skills, which met the need, but it was more of CIRP is more reactive to an event, not preventative, and that's what we're looking at. So when he put that on my radar, it really caused me to start thinking about it. We began a discussion. Well, fast forward a couple of months, and German wings happened, 95-25 in March. And don't forget, a year prior, MH370 actually had happened, and that mystery that surrounded that whole disappearance. So this really became now something really that was, bleeping on the radar. So, well, the FAA, doing good due diligence that they always do, the commercial air safety team from the FAA wanted to take a look at this whole issue about pilot fitness here in the United States. They did not feel that they had adequate expertise, so they tossed it back up to the FAA again to form an ARC, an Aviation Rulemaking Committee, of which I participated. Dr. Berry was the co-chair of the ARC, and there were 8 recommendations that came out of that ARC. And ALPA was recognized as having very robust pilot assistance programs, right? We have Aeromedical, we have HIMSS, we have CIRP, we have ProSTANS, and when you put it together with other programs like CRM and threat and error management and mentoring, which is now starting to take on a life of its own, we had a pretty strong universe of programs where they almost served as behavioral gates. So if somebody was having a problem and we missed it in one area, very likely would probably pick it up somewhere else. So real good, strong programs. But again, not really anything out there that could complete that circle. And I use the term force multiplier because that was one of the things that the ARC also recommended, was that try to implement as many programs as you possibly can to get that synergistic effect, right? That where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So after that, we had our aha moment. And I worked together with Mark Malin and then John Taylor and Quay, and we had a group of people together with us as well. Suzanne Kalfas, our attorney here, our staff attorney here at ALPA. All assisting, we started to really buckle down and take a look at what we might be able to do. And basically, we came to the conclusion that we needed to do it in these two ways. We had two goals. One, we already had pre-existing. When we looked at ALPA, once again, I have to say that some of our MECs, our Master Executive Councils, for those folks that don't know, those are the local governing bodies that govern our individual airline union representatives. There were several that had their own pilot peer support volunteer structures. One, Delta PAN, Pilot Assistance Network. The other one was FedEx's PATH, Pilot Assistance Team Hotline, and United had one called SOAR. And so there was already a lot of work being done. And in fact, the ARC recognized the fact that these were the gold standard, really. Because if you're talking about a peer, what better peer would you want to talk to than somebody that's in your own airline, knows exactly what you're going through and what your life is like? Well, here's the problem for us, though, is that we have MECs that really are much smaller than the ones I just described. So their resources were less. And so when we looked at the available resources, plus some of our airlines were quite small, didn't have that many pilots, so it wasn't really appropriate to do a big program there. So what we did, though, is we wanted our second goal to be to have any ALPA pilot, okay, all 60,000 of them, to have access to a peer support line, a pilot peer support line, 24/7, right? And the way we were going to set it up is we have it here in the United States. They do things a little differently in Canada, but the lines will still work. They will be directed to their resources up there. So that's what we put together. So I want to kind of paint the picture a little bit too, and I don't really need this, but I need to paint the picture a little bit about you look at the stresses of a pilot. Just look at kind of what we deal with on a daily basis and why this is so important, all right? You have a pretty stressful job at times, right? You're in a little tube and you're in a close compartment with somebody that you may have flown with once in your career, right? That's kind of unusual for most professions. You're dealing with, the aircraft, the environment, the crew, and all those kind of things that come along with that as you brief your flight for every day. You're dealing with weather, you're dealing with all sorts of things. Now let's toss in some of the industrial side of this, negotiations, things like that. Some of the tougher sides of the industry, right, and the fee-for-departure carriers. All sources of stress. And let's not forget about home, all right? If the spouse is ill, or worse yet, gone, if the kids have a drug problem, I'm talking real life, where your head's not in the game. And what we realized right away, Dr. Berry, the FAA was on top of this a long time ago with the I'm Safe checklist, right? Illness, that stood for illness, medication, right? Stress, right? Alcohol, fatigue. And the E bounces around for me. I think it was eating or nutrition, but it used to be emotion, right? I think, or something like that. Yeah. Right. Emotion. So this was very consistent. This approach was very consistent with what we were getting ready to do. All right. Now, match this up with the personality of a pilot. Okay, most of us are extremely type A. We typically, unless you have a pair of wings, we don't take advice real well. You have to walk in a person's shoes, right? And that's why I think this program is so valuable. And you throw on top of how actively monitored we are in our profession anyway. I dare anybody to tell me a profession that is more heavily scrutinized than ours already. And that was one of the things that, I think that was recognized in the ARC. So, between our line checks, unannounced line checks, line operation safety audits, medicals, simulators, the list goes on and on. Another source of possible stress. So really, what I'm doing is painting a picture to say, if in fact we are these type A individuals and we are somewhat reluctant to admit that we're having a problem, Because let's face it, I mean, you are risk.
Really?
Huh?
Really?
Really? Yeah. Risk management. We are professional risk managers. That's what we do every day, but not so well on ourselves sometimes. And I think you can almost look at this. Think about this. When we're flying, you could look at the emergencies that we handle on a daily basis, or you get some pretty interesting emergencies if you look at what happened with Sully, and they just did a masterful job, right? Why was it so hard to get pilots to do go-arounds? I mean, I think it was because there was this mindset, right, that, oh man, I messed that up, and I can do this, I can get this thing, and it just took a different way to think about it, and it's a no-fault going arm basically, and everybody's safer for it. Well, same thing here. I think that this is why the peer support volunteer network will be so powerful, is because you're talking to somebody else who has a pair of wings and knows your life. And so with that's pretty much sets the stage. And so I wanted to ask our guests a couple questions. I'm going to let this be free-flowing if anybody else wants to respond to something that's appropriate to respond to, unless it was specifically dealing with one of the organizations. But also I'd like to encourage, I'll try to leave a little time for the audience to ask a couple of questions. So I'm going to start to my left with Dr. Berry. Dr. Berry, in the eight recommendations, I have to, it's funny, I was just telling them in the green room that when I was making the questions, they were like, I had like 2 or 3 for everybody else, and I had about 9 or 10 for him that we'll never get to. But, he does make himself available to me.
And I didn't know I was going to be here. So.
Yeah, he did not know he was going to be here.
I thought I was done after the last one.
Yeah, so I owe him for coming on. But anyway, I have the 8 recommendations in here, but you know them as well as I do. And for the benefit of the audience and the folks that are watching on the web, there were 2 specific recommendations in the pilot fitness arc. One was readdressing the need for additional AME training, all right? And the other was to have the FAA promulgate information on available pilot assistance programs to the carriers. And I was going to ask you, Dr. Berry, how are we doing on that? Do you see it as, from whatever has been done to like mission accomplished, or you see this like an ongoing process? It's something that we kind of always need to keep our eye on.
I would call it an ongoing process, essentially, although some of it we have accomplished. And that you heard Quay mention some of what EASA is doing in their response, and they had their own response through a task force as to what they were going to do post-German wings. And we talked about the drug and the alcohol testing. But he also mentioned the other part, and that one of their task force recommendations was to do psychological testing, and they were sort of unclear as to where that would be done, but it was either some sort of psychological testing, formal psychological testing, had to be done, and it was either done when the pilot entered his pilot career, or if it never had been done, the airline would be responsible for doing this sort of thing. And so, I don't know if you recall, but we had a lot of discussion in that area at the ARC as to what did we feel within the United States, whether that was really necessary or not. And some of that related to, all of your examinations with your AME. And so, and as I said last hour, I've been one, I've been there and done it for a lot of years, and that I felt, and I realized somebody that I was talking to in the break here was talking about that there are AMEs and then there are AMEs, and you got the AMEs and everybody knows them that you won't tell anything to. It's I'm going to be, it's like veterinary medicine. I'm not going to tell him anything. If he finds it, then we'll discuss it, but I'm not going to tell that person anything. And then the AMEs that you really trust and like and you'll tell everything to. And so I like to believe I was that latter. I hope I was. But I know now, being in charge of all of them, that there are both kinds, and I wish we didn't have that. I wish they were all the ones that everybody trusted and knew that if they were going to do something that jeopardized your certificate, it was with the thought in mind, okay, we found this, now how do we make sure that it doesn't ground you and we get you back in the cockpit? So I felt at the beginning of the various meetings that we had within the ARC that we did not want to go the way that the EASA task force was recommending in regard to formal psychological testing. I felt like albeit idealized to some degree, what an AME exam should be like is that the AME exam was, if not adequate now, could be enhanced to the part that our AMEs were made more aware of psychological screening and that nothing more than screening was needed. And if in that examination it was determined that there were concerns that surfaced, that the AME could recommend further evaluation if that was appropriate, but not that we would be mandating that every one of you has to have. And one of the recommendations was that you have psychological testing as part of every single FAA exam, which I thought was totally inappropriate. And so that was the U.S. pushback to that. What we did come up with is the consensus, and this was more pilot, I guess participation is the right word, than medical participation. I think we had, as medical members of the ARC itself, actual members of the ARC, there was myself and one other doctor and a chief psychiatrist. So we had basically three that were representing medicine per se. An add-on person was the chief medical officer for Transport Canada was there as an observer. So we had that kind of input, but everybody else was a pilot. And so they had their wings on, so we can listen to them, right? And trust them. That was supposed to elicit a laugh. Come on, guys. Lighten up. So one of the recommendations was that we would enhance AME training. The nice thing was that even though the report didn't come out for a year after that time period, I, being responsible for all the AMEs, long before the report came out, I knew that was going to be a recommendation, and so I initiated the enhanced training. We still have not reached every single AME. We've got 2,800 AMEs, U.S. and worldwide, but we've probably 3/4 of the way through the entire AME population on receiving this enhanced training. So every AME, and they have to get retrained every 3 years, and that can be up, face-to-face at least every 6 years as a minimum, or at least online in the interim 3-year time periods. So we've completed that sort of thing. So that part's good. The other part of disseminating information, and I think actually, and if I had done my homework beforehand, knowing I was going to be here, I would have researched the 8 recommendations. But there were several regarding getting the information out about peer support programs. And one was that we would have something that you didn't mention, that we'd have something on the FAA website that sort of listed all the various programs that were available and out there. Another would be what were best practices within an airline, an individual airline, and then explain what the various types of programs were. That process has been slow to come. I'm thankful that ALPA has jumped out in front and said, we are going to have a peer support program. And so I think whether we can get a SAFO or an info out that sort of gives the best practices and that sort of thing, that's ongoing. It's not totally within my purview to be able to tell the FAA this is what you're going to do. So it's ongoing.
Great. Yeah, I noticed even with my AME, I'm getting asked a few more questions about, and particularly because he knows I has a job. He's always asking, how much sleep you getting? What are you doing? And you just ask him more general fitness type questions,
That's
pilot
good.
fitness type questions. So, okay, great, thank you. Quay, you've been you're part of this team. You've definitely been a strong proponent of establishing this pilot peer support program. You also, though, have a lot of experience around the world with familiarity with a lot of other programs that are out there. I was just interested in your perspective in terms of lessons learned, what we've done in ours, and I know you made a great deal of input into our program as well. And by the way, this program has been reviewed by many other highly regarded aerospace medical professionals, including the former federal air surgeon who took a review on the curriculum, and we'll talk about the curriculum in a little bit. But it does meet the highest standards of medical and scientific review. That was what we were shooting for. So, But with that, can you give us a little bit in terms of your perspective of where we are and where the others are and what you see in terms of lessons learned? But then I also want to focus on the valuable relationship that we have at ALPA with AMAS and the ability to help out there. So if you could talk about that a little bit, that'd be great.
Be happy to. I've had the good fortune of co-chairing the Aerospace Medicine Association's Pilot Mental Health, or now Aerospace Medicine Mental Health Working Group, and we've had the opportunity to survey airlines and pilot unions from around the world about what they do and to meet with those individuals. One thing I've found is that each circumstance is unique in the civil aviation regulatory authorities may have different rules regarding reporting, et cetera, or their support of that. The medical community, particularly in Europe where they protect privacy, has a set of rules, and that's overlaid with the union philosophy, the corporate philosophy, the collective bargaining agreements that they have, and most importantly, the resources that the airlines can bring to bear. And I think that was one of the key principles behind ALPA making sure that the smaller carriers that weren't rich in resources would have these would have the ability to take advantage of it. But I think a couple things are absolutely critical universally. Number one, it's pilots talking to pilots at the first level, because one of the ARC's recommendations was to reduce the barriers to pilots seeking help. Pilots, by our characteristics, we're obsessive compulsive, we're narcissistic, we solve problems, and we don't ask for help. Okay? Beyond that, we're fine. But
Sounds like a doctor.
Yeah.
Or a lawyer.
But it's the peer that's the key. If you can reach out to a peer who can share those experiences and build that trust, just like Mike was talking about, a good AME or a good flight surgeon in your squadron if you were in the military. That's key. Another key is to make sure the system works consistently for everyone, that if someone calls, they're not put off, that they're not delayed, they have a way to go. Number three, you need to advertise it so that people know that it's out there. And a failure to market it, both by the airline and by the pilot group, usually a union, results in less than optimal utilization and less than optimal result. The other thing is we need to protect the peers. The peers who do this work, the HIMSS work, the CRRP, the pro stands, all of these people are very, very dedicated and passionate professionals. Most of you are in that category right out here is serving as volunteers. But to do that, there's some burnout. And we talked about in the planning, the compassion burnout that you have. It can be very, very taxing. And so what I think is relatively unique to what we're doing here is a very formal training program. Now, I've seen training programs at other carriers as well and overseas. But the synergy of bringing everyone together so that we know the resources that are available. When a pilot calls, the pilot knows, I'm with you, I have your back, and the organization has all these resources to bring to bear so that the pilot knows he or she is protected. Those things are critical. The one thing I think that perhaps we need to look at, which we haven't yet, but we're in the infant stages, in New Zealand, they have a separate breakout for women, too, as far as peer support. And they have a women's issue, and if a woman calls up, a female pilot calls up, they're directed to a female peer, too. And I do think there are some strong advantages to that. So there are different solutions for the problem. The problem is common. There's some common elements in each of these, and anything we're doing is fine. It's a wonderful start, and I'm sure just like HIMSS over the last 44 years we've been doing HIMSS, we'll tweak it as we go along to improve it all the time as we get feedback and the culture changes.
You mentioned in the beginning, the effort underway to try to remove as many barriers as possible. And I know when we approached the subject, I talked about this on Monday as well, is pilots typically want to know three things. And I learned this from Mark Pinsky, who was the pioneer for the Delta Airlines program of PAN. And he said, and it's really stuck with me, he said, pilots want to know three things. They want to know, what will the FAA think if I come forward? What will the company think? And will I get paid? Because quite honestly, when you really think about it, if you're already having a problem, do you want more of a problem? Sometimes it's more of a problem. The answers to those 3 questions are more stressful than the stress that you're already going through. So we tried to approach it from that perspective, to break down as many of the barriers as we possibly could to facilitate a trusting relationship to where pilots can come forward in confidentiality, with all confidentiality, to have a discussion about some of the issues that they were going through. And, the peer support, the pilot peer support instructors are taught to, when they, or the volunteers, I'm sorry, when they hear something, they know what to look for, and if it's something, mind you, I think we kind of thought from some of the statistics that we've seen that over 90% of the time when someone calls in, they just want somebody to listen. They want somebody that's walked in their shoes and they can resolve it right there. In those other very rare instances, statistically, if there's necessary to maybe help facilitate or encourage or discuss going to another mental health professional to seek additional help, that's the different step, and that's where AMAS is such a valuable resource to the Airline Pilots Association, because you really want to get that right, because that's the thing. We're trying to break down the barriers. If it was up to us, there would be no stigma, right? We would have this all worked out, but it's not up to us, and we're trying to build this from the ground up. Okay, I'm going to ask a question to our PA chairman. John, you know that when we first looked at this, we kind of looked around and tried to decide whether or not we could look out there and see existing programs and maybe adopt those, use them as a template, kind of like a plug and play. But as we went down that road, and I know we looked at mental health first aid, which is a good program, but there are some differences there, not truly a peer support type program. I'll let you talk about that a little bit. But what kind of get into some of the thought process that we use or that you use to make your decision to do this with our resources, with our in-house resources?
Well, my first thought, as soon as you championed starting up a new program, a few words I don't think I can repeat, but it was, "Are you kidding me?" I love the idea, but I have no idea how to start this. So I did start the journey. The first thing I did is I called Quay. Asked him about existing peer programs that were out there. And come to find out, there is more than just the PAN-PATH SOAR that we know in the United States. So we started looking internationally. One of the best, well-known internationally and longest was the Qantas PAN Network. So I really reached out to them. They were very gracious. They use mental health first aid. So I thought maybe we did have a turnkey product right there. Elle and I took the class. We had other people. I think you took it as well. Quay, Suzanne, Mark Malin. We really bought off on the idea of a well-vetted research program that really broke it down to simple steps for a peer program. The main thing that they do teach and advocate for is breaking the stigma down, a self-motivated, self-help program that is peer motivated. There's not a certificate, so to say, or a licensing that you're receiving. It was an 8-hour course. The overall message was beautiful. But we ran into several issues as we tried to implement that in the airlines. Mainly, that was a peer program for the general public dealing with a gamut of issues that we don't really see sometimes. We don't have a high prevalence. So there were some hours that I thought we could shave or move to more appropriate subjects. Secondarily, it's really based on a face-to-face program. And as we know, pretty much every pilot today lives off their cell phone. We have friends that are across the state, across the country, around the world. And so we knew that we would have to tap into some of our pre-existing peer programs, like CRP. Louise has a wonderful program for critical incident response and does listening skills and builds on the skills needed to interact on the phone, which would be crucial. Furthermore, within the mental health first aid, they had a pretty big module on substance misuse and abuse. Well, we've already got a gold standard out there with Corey's program, the HIMSS. I didn't think that we could cross-contaminate there. I didn't want this line to turn into HIMSS Light. I don't think that would be an appropriate thing to do. So at the end of the day, we looked at it, was still interested. Elle and I went to actually become mental health first aid instructors to dive a little bit deeper and see if we could really vet this out. And I think that was very valuable because then we got really the backstory of where this research had come from, the overall goal of the stigmas that were out there, and how to really facilitate the education to the potential peers. It was a week-long course, which I'm glad we did. Then we all had a meeting, and I expressed my concerns. Were we trying to put a round peg in a square hole? At the end of the day, I think that's what we came up with. And once again, didn't like you that day. We decided to come up with our own program. And there's a reason why. We teach at ALPA over 5,000 or 6,000 hours a year. We have the experts. We've got Quay. We have access to Dr. Berry. We reached out to the previous flight surgeon. I've got Mark Malin, who has a master in course development. It just seemed like that would be a better fit. So we revisited, obviously, the PATH, PAN, and SOAR programs because they seem to be working very well. Do a gap analysis on them, we find that what works at one little property might not work at another property. So we ended up basically, I'll be honest publicly, we stole everything from everybody in the world. We're pretty good thieves at the end of the day. No shame about it. And the best part about it was every program out there freely handed it over and said, this is the best practice for us, and it works. You go try it on and see if it works for you. Some of it did. A lot of it did. We were very gracious when we just taught our first class over the last 2 days, and we mentioned a lot of properties because we didn't reinvent the wheel, to be perfectly honest. Once that was all done with thousands of hours of work, we had the subject matter experts here for the last 2 days. That would be PATH, PAN, SOAR, or other pilot assistance leaderships throughout ALPA. And we were critiqued very well over the last 2 days. Anybody who's in these volunteer positions tend not to be shy when you ask them, what do you think? I got emails all last night. On top of that, Bob Chapman and Mark Pinsky from PAN and SOAR have volunteered to help us tweak it just a little bit to just get it fine-tuned. We're running into some IT issues, which I think we've got resolved, but we're hoping to have this now turnkey product ready to go in about 2 months. We resolved the issues for the small properties, the big properties, so that we don't dilute what has already been done, and we get the expert or the expert peer for that caller. And at the end of the day, we want the appropriate resource for the appropriate person.
Great. Thank you. He wasn't kidding about the thousands of hours of work that we've been putting into this over the last 3.5 years. At an incredible degree of volunteerism and professionalism. At one point, John and Ellen had experienced, they're both in Houston, and they experienced that horrible flood last year. And pretty much I didn't realize, I couldn't figure out why his cell phone wasn't working too well, but he was camping out on the second floor of his flooded house as he's trying to take care of all this. So, but it's, and a little spoiler alert, by the way, the very first training session for instructors happened Monday and Tuesday here. And very proud of all the people that worked so hard to make this happen. Anybody in here take the course? Anybody did? Okay, there's one, yeah. But pretty full house we had in there, so off to a good start. All right, Ellen. So the Pilot Peer Support Program comes under Aeromedical. That's where we've decided to put that. You jumped right in, like I said, to the storm, and you really went to work, and incredible effort, and lots of support also from your carrier as well as from us. So here's my question to you. Could you share with the group how you know, in terms of how we approach the pilot peer support process, like when you're dealing with somebody that calls, and in particular the acronym that you thought of that I thought was pretty good. So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about that.
Well, we're airline pilots, Joe. We're not creative. So, well, okay, I'm not. How about that?
You have left brain.
Neither is Joe or John. No, what we decided to do, just to keep it simple for pilots to remember, was let them remember the ALPA plan. And instead of standing for Airline Pilots Association, it stands for Assess for Needs and Safety, Listen Non-Judgmentally, Provide Hope and Encouragement, and Access Appropriate Resources. And you can break that down into, I mean, each caller, when they call in, okay, are they safe? Do they have a place to go if they need anything immediately? And then you're just listening to them. So we practiced all of our listening skills. We developed those. We're going to continue. We're looking at even and expanding more listening skills. That was one of the critiques of the class was we need more listening skills. We need to practice this more. Providing hope and encouragement is you're not giving them the answers. You're not fixing their problems. You're just, saying, hey, I'm here. I'm going to listen to you. I will be with you. What can I help you with? And then when you access appropriate resources, we have so many resources within ALPA. I mean, all the different disciplines. And so we went through all of the different levels that they have access to, how to hand it off to a different case if it really isn't in the peer program, if it needs to be referred to HIMSS, or if it needs to be, really, this is probably a better call for CIRP, then that's okay. Hey, I will help you immediately, but you might want to talk to a CIRP volunteer as well. So that was really the simplest form of the explanation of the plan, so yeah.
No, excellent. I thought that was really clever and easy to remember, which is good for me at my age. Mark, Mark Malin, staff, aeromedical and human performance expert. Got to work with Mark when I was assigned the duties on the pilot fitness arc. Mark helped me articulate the concerns of the association at the highest levels, helped me do my homework, and made me look smarter than I am. So I appreciate that. We worked many a long hour, I know, out there in Herndon burning the midnight oil, trying to get reports ready and things like that, and I appreciate that. One of the talents that Mark also has is something we needed desperately, and that was curriculum development, of which Mark is an expert at. And so what his role was is to not only help with getting all the input from all the folks that worked on the program, but to actually put it in a cohesive, logical flow for the classroom, hour by hour. I'll let you explain how detailed it gets, but suffice it to say, every hour has specific PowerPoints, learning objectives, and a very unique thing that we don't do in any other training program, but I'll let you talk about that, Mark. So.
Hey, well, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you about this. So this is a pretty neat program. We launched this program, as Captain DePete mentioned yesterday and the day prior. And we had 30 participants. We limited the enrollment to 30. And actually, I think we had about 34 in the room that ended up taking the final exam. This morning, while I was paying attention to some other things going on in the room, I looked at an analysis of some of the data that came in about who liked the course. We've got a ways to go. Data came in. 81% of people really liked the course a lot. So that means we've got some growing to do. 19% didn't love it as much as we'd hoped. We asked another question I thought was very valuable. We asked how many of the participants in the course felt that they were well prepared to go out and do this work. And a lot of people that were in the course had never done peer support work before. And we got a pretty good number back. 69% said, we feel well prepared after the 2 days that we spent to go out and begin this work. So I think we're at a point right now with the course that we've got some growing to do, but we've got a really great start here. And we're getting excellent feedback. We'll be getting more feedback. And the discussions that John and Elle and I have had, and that I've had with you, This is a course that's going to continue to grow and improve and develop. In terms of the course itself, I followed a methodology that's well used, well liked, methodology developed by the U.S. military over the years to build the course basically backwards from the course final objectives, what we were trying to accomplish. We built that course backwards so that everything pointed toward the objectives and the core competencies that we were trying to develop. What was really neat, we looked at potential core competencies. What core competencies should a peer supporter have? And as we did the research, there are no core competencies that have been developed for this kind of peer support. They were out there for SAMHSA and some other ones, but not for ALPA, not for pilots. And it was Suzanne Kalfas that spent some time analyzing the needs, and she developed a beautiful list of core competencies that the curriculum points toward developing these. The ALPA plan, which was really a genius between John and Elle, that came out of, I think, some of the thinking, some of the learning that they picked up as mental health first aiders. But that's a beautiful thing because it's a checklist, and pilots like checklists. Medics, a lot of us are EMTs, medics that are pilots, I've noticed in the audience. And you've got a step-by-step checklist you can follow as a peer supporter. It's kind of like doing CPR. It's ALPA. So that's kind of neat. So to get back to your question being, a little bit about the course. So the course is basically 4 areas. The first area we looked at was really focusing on communication. Essentially, what is a pilot peer supporter? He's somebody, or she is somebody who knows how to communicate, who knows how to listen, and who can do that empathetically. And so we spent a lot of energy on that. And in the course, part of that was time spent practicing those skills. We learned that we have more to do there. We didn't model the skills as well as we should have. We're going to do that differently next time. But there was a lot of people that came back as we surveyed this and said that was a very valuable part of the course. The course is structured so that participants who are learning these skills develop high-order thinking skills. And that means they have to do problem-based learning. And so we tried to put a lot of problems in the course so that students were confronted with the problem, and then in the process of solving the problem, we're able to develop some of the higher levels of thinking about how to solve these issues. So we hope and we think that the people that came out of the course are well prepared, and we're going to make it better. We're going to continue to make it better. So that's the first part of the course, is heavy on listening, heavy on communication. The second section kind of followed along mental health first aid in some ways, in that we spent some time on really common mental health issues, the issues that pilots are most likely to confront, issues that the general population is most likely to confront, and pilots are really no different. So we looked at anxiety, we looked at depression, and we didn't spend a lot of time with substance abuse because of Corey Sloan's HIMSS program, the FAA's HIMSS program. We know it's your program, and we have some peer support involved in that. So we acknowledge and thank FAA for that program. So there's a section that deals with that. It addresses, understanding and recognizing when a pilot is in a position that he's either healthy, or he's reacting, or he's injured, or he's ill. If he's ill, he's probably not going to be flying. If he's injured, then he's probably going to be getting some treatment. And if he's reacting, and we believe, based on our predictions, that 90% of the pilots that call PPS, call peer support, will be reacting, that these are pilots that we can help with, we can work with, and we can help on this level and get them back in that healthy place where they need to be. So that's that was another section. We did another brief section that looked at legal issues, confronting the legal issues and the ethics, and what is an ethical practice for a peer support person? What are the boundaries so we don't exceed those boundaries, and keep not only our peer supporters safe, but we keep ALPA safe, everybody safe from liability. So that was an important part of the course. And then we did another section dealing with the resources of ALPA, and we have this huge umbrella of pilot assistance resources. How do pilot assistance peers access those resources? What are they? And how do they help a pilot understand what's available so that the pilot can make that decision as to whether or not he wants to utilize some of these available resources. So that's kind of a quick overview.
Now, the part about the judgment, pre-testing to kind of ascertain a little bit of, kind of get a feel for the mental health literacy of the individual, and then the post-testing, which is something that we don't do in any other program. So you kind of get an in and out version. Well,
we decided to do testing in the program, and that was something that we pushed really early on. And I do think it's the only ALPA ASO program that does testing. So we produced a written exam, which I'm pleased to announce everybody passed yesterday. So we had a written exam. We have some other elements. There's a portfolio element that pilots actually produce and create an interesting portfolio as part of the 2 days that they're there. So that got some really positive reviews, by the way. Didn't mention that, but it did. There's some checklists that they also go through. The pretest was a discussion that happened due to that guy Mark Pinsky over there. Mark Pinsky, we were sitting down at dinner, and Mark Pinsky said, hey, we think that this would be really beneficial to publish on this and to show the validity of growth that happens with a peer supporter. And he said, in order to do that, you probably ought to do a pretest. You ought to see where people are at baseline. And so we've got pretest data, and we've got post-test data now. And what I'm early on seeing there is we have to grow more. We want to make the course better so that we can see a greater difference in the pretest and the post-test scores. There were improvements, but we want to see bigger improvements. So
I think we tried to build this way, right, to really make the pilot peer support volunteers begin to do the work that they're going to be doing versus, we tried to keep it as lean as possible and focused as to what their responsibilities were going to be, and then, of course, the legal side with the legal issues of maintaining the proper boundaries and all. I think we viewed this as an ongoing process, and that's why we needed some type of metric to judge it. And then even on the recurrent that we're discussing now about how we want to do recurrent, the ability for some of the folks who have had the experience out in the field to come into the classroom and share it with the newer students. So this is going to be something that's growing constantly, and we'll learn more and more and do it better and better. And just another example of where the Airline Pilots Association, just in everything that we do, I mean, we put our dues dollars where our mouth is, I think, and we didn't wait for anybody to solve this issue. We took it upon ourselves to do it, just like we do the other ones. So very proud of the effort underway here. And the support from all our line pilots out there that are helping to do all this. So I really think this is going to make a difference in pilots' lives, really will. Because as we began to do this for the last 3.5 years, I was getting odd calls from time to time from people out there who were having dumb difficulties and trying to figure out a way to deal with them. And it was pretty apparent to me that the original assessment by the original PA chair was pretty spot on, that need exists. But now, with this new initiative, I feel like we've completed that circle. We've got the work-related stress programs and the non-work-related stress, and I actually see this as a possible, almost a clearinghouse for access to other pilot assistance programs. It's very likely someone might call and say, I think I have a problem here or there. Where do I go? As a means to facilitate and educate people on the resources that they do have already in the association. You pointed out we have a lot of resources in this organization that many pilots don't even know. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to leave a little bit. We've got 9 minutes. I have more questions, but you and I will do this like we always do. But I wanted to leave an opportunity for you folks out in the audience or anybody viewing on the web that might want to ask a question to any of the folks up here. Let her go first and we'll tell you second. Okay,
Sorry
go ahead.
about that.
We got time.
My name's Devin Norris. I'm actually up here with CIRP for Delta. And my question was actually more about if you perhaps fly with someone whose self-assessment is not necessarily where it needs to be, and you have concerns about them, is the more appropriate thing to call pro stands? Is there crossover communication between the groups? Because ordinarily you'd call pro standards if you had concerns about someone else, but really they're just going through a divorce or something and their head's not in the game. Is there confidentiality between those groups, and is it still appropriate to call pro standards over the peer support group?
Yeah. You want to answer?
Oh, I'm taking it. Okay. It really depends. And the one thing that, looking at all the programs, they're all wonderful and they all have their place. We also realize that there's a lot of cross-contamination. Even though that sounds negative, it's really a good thing. How many times have we seen in our peer work, even in pro stands, I start the conversation and then I refer him to Corey because we find out that there's alcohol possibly issues. Really, that's what this whole program is all about. We listen to the individual and apply appropriate resources. There would be no harm in if you were flying with a pilot to start off with pro stands. If you think it's pro stands, they're a clearinghouse as well as all of the other PA programs. If they dive into it and find out that there's more to the story, they can refer over to the PPS program, PATH, Panelist, or whatever is available. There is confidentiality, just like any other programs. We actually mirrored pretty much CRP and pro stands in that aspect. Did that answer your question?
That was pretty much why I referred to them as behavioral gates, the different programs, because I don't really care where we capture it so much as long as we capture it and we get the pilot the help that they need. Some things you might, if you just happen to be the person that you're flying with that individual and you happen to know that it's specifically, oh yeah, that sounds classic pro stands, and yeah, I don't see any harm in it. We're not trying to take the place of any of those, so, but I think the fact that we have so many now programs that interact like that, it's just more likely to get the help where it's needed. So, as much as trying to color it, but go ahead.
I think one thing you can do as a peer, and many of our peers do it, is point out that this is a safety issue. This is all about aviation safety and personal health, and appeal to that person's professionalism about making an assessment. We talked about the I'm Safe checklist. You can go through that with them and say, if I told you I had the same problems, would you allow your family to fly with me if we did that? And then make them aware of all the resources that are there. And all of these PA programs have confidentiality associated with them. And then encourage them through their sense of professionalism, because everyone here is a professional. And in most cases, particularly when they're calling our office and the pilot's not sure whether he or she should fly at that point, we go through the same thing. One, it's about safety. Are you safe? Two, is this good for your health? Three, is this the right thing to do? Right? And if you can answer yes to all of those, then probably continue to fly. But if you have doubts about them, pull yourself off, get things better before things get worse.
If I could
get into that one just a little bit. We found in all the research, and we've got demonstrations, as people go into a stress reaction, you've seen it throughout check rides and whatnot, they become fixated. And their decision-making is probably not the best. How many times have we talked to people and said, really using that tool, if I told you your first officer just came home, his wife was gone with the dogs and the kids, drained the bank account, took the good car, and you're driving to work, would you want to be flying with him? Well, no, he doesn't sound like his head would be in the game. I don't think that'd be safe. That's what you just told me. Using reflection in the I'm Safe checklist really solves a lot of problems because it pulls them out of the situation. It kind of opens up their eyes a little bit.
I want to say, too, if there's any question as the peers delve into the individual issue about any of the certification issues, I can't stress this enough. Call AMAS early. Call them early. They are not, I got to say it over and over again. I want to say it out to everybody. I wish everybody would put it on their refrigerator. They're not AMEs. He's board certified aerospace professional, family medicine, addiction services. This is your confidential resource to discuss the possibility of whatever you're experiencing, how it might affect your certification. Earlier you do that, the better. Mark, you had a question, sir.
Well, I just want to start with a comment. For those of you who don't know me, you've heard my name mentioned now. I've been doing this for, I can't tell you how many years. Please take a moment and thank these people. This is
Thank you, Mark.
15, 16, 17 years ago when I started talking about mental health, I was the lone wolf. And this is amazing. We have an hour at a safety forum talking about this. I can't begin to tell you how mind-boggling this hour is. So it's unbelievable. I have two specific questions based on my experience that I'd like specifically for Dr. Berry and Dr. Snyder. First of all, of course, I have to pick the tough ones. The vast majority of problems are very relatively small if you look at the bell curve. Germanwings is the exception that got us to where we are, but that's not where we spend the vast majority of our time. Can you explain, one, why, let's just pick depression and anxiety, even though there's a whole spectrum of mental health issues, are a disease no different than a broken bone? And second of all, specifically to Dr. Berry, if you go see a counselor, does the FAA really care? The common question we have is, the FAA, no, I mean, I shouldn't say it that way. We know that it's important to report it, but it's not a big deal. I guess that's a better way to put it. I just want you to reaffirm that that's the right thing to do it.
Yeah, I'm from the government. Of course we care.
I worded it wrong, but you know what I mean. You know where I'm going.
I know. I've known you long enough, yes. And you've asked that question before. No, I mean, you know, if you want to get really bureaucratic about it, there's a question on your medical form that says if you've seen anybody, you know, since your last exam, basically for the last 3 years, you're supposed to report it. So in that case, yeah. Is that a serious thing? Probably not. And again, that's part of what we wanted to impart to our AMEs, because obviously you have to trust your AME. If I'm going to tell them that, what are they going to write down? I know what I'm going to tell them, but what are they going to write down, and what are we going to see when it comes through? Is that you trust them enough that they can understand why you got marriage counseling, why you were stressed and you got some counseling to help you deal with that, and is that a big deal? And the most part, the answer is no, it's probably not. It makes you healthier and better able to deal with stress that comes on down the line. That's a real difficult area, though, and I understand. I mean, I would have the same trepidation as to, how much do I say? But again, bureaucratically, when it gets to the filling out your form for your next medical, you pretty much. I mean, if it's formal, if you talk to your peer support person within this program that you're standing up, does that have to be reported? No, that doesn't have to be reported. You end up with a professional with a visit and maybe repeat visits. Should that be reported? The answer is yes. That doesn't mean you're going to get a knock on the door by someone dressed in black that says you're down. So.
And I know we're short of time here, but I wanted to comment that the FAA has a legitimate reason for wanting information about this. It's zero.
Serious.
Engine failure.
Yeah. Has a legitimate reason for wanting to know that. Likewise, a mental health professional has a legitimate reason for wanting to protect the privacy of your information. And when asked for a report, one of the biggest problems we see in our office is the mental health professional is reluctant to provide appropriate information as far as the presenting symptoms, the treatment that's ongoing, the status of the individual, and the prognosis. But with a good report, and we assist hundreds, if not thousands of pilots every year with this, with a good but relatively brief report that's prepared by the mental health professional who's taking care of that individual with the counseling, that can be presented to the AME, and the AME can simply make a note on the back of the form that they interviewed the pilot about it and issue the certificate. The problem comes when the mental health professional tries to be too protective and doesn't provide adequate information. And then there's an unknown as far as the severity and the prognosis of it, and that's what causes problems. But we're able to help serve as a liaison between the mental health professional and the individual pilot to make sure he or she continues to have their certification if appropriate.
Thanks, Quay.
Would echo that.
Well, unfortunately, I knew we would start getting into the really good stuff here towards the end, but anyway, we're out of time. So please join me in thanking my esteemed panel here for their help. Thank you.